welcome. If you're tuning into Tenant Thursdays for the very first time, I want to welcome you. This is a segment that we do every Thursday at 6 p.m. Here on LCBH's Facebook page, and we cover policies and topics that are crucial and important to Chicago tenants and renters. Um, my name is Alex Escobedo, and I'm the Communication and Events Coordinator here at Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. And I'm happy to announce and to say that today's segment is going to be covering the Just Housing Amendment and kind of what you need to know about it and what it is essentially. With me today is one of our senior attorneys, Aileen Flanagan, who was with us last week. And she briefly mentioned this amendment in that last broadcast. So I'm happy to dive deep into what this amendment is. Thanks for being with us, Aileen.
Hi, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Before I get too far into the segment, I do want to mention that I will be posting comments throughout the broadcast. But the very first one is going to be just a link for a Google form. In this form, we're asking for a zip code or your ward information if you know what ward you're in. And the reason why we ask for this information is because it helps us tailor the broadcast to target and talk about the topics that are affecting and that are in people's minds during these unprecedented times. The zip codes allows us to find the prevalent trends and concerns in your area. So filling it out, it's completely anonymous. It's just putting the zip code and the ward information, and that'll help us better improve Tenant Thursdays. I also want to say that if you have any immediate concerns, to please go to renovention.com. I will also be posting a comment with the link to that in the comment section of this broadcast as well. So you can go talk to Rennie and get some legal information, or talk and ask specific concerns you may have that are more immediate and not related to the Just Housing Amendment. So without further ado, diving into this topic, Aileen, what is the Just Housing Amendment?
Hi, Alex. Thanks for that question. So the Just Housing Amendment is a rather new amendment that was passed in January of 2020. It just became effective, and what it does is it amends the Human Rights Ordinance of Cook County to include criminal history. So the Human Rights Ordinance in Cook County protects people from housing discrimination on the basis of several factors. So you cannot discriminate against people in Cook County on the basis of their race or their color or their sex or their age, their religion, their disability status, their national origin or ancestry. So those are some of the things that we expect. You also cannot discriminate against people in housing based on their sexual orientation, marital status, parental status, military discharge status, their source of income, how they pay their rent, or their gender identity. And now, thanks to this ordinance, you also cannot be discriminated against based on covered criminal history.
And we've covered some of these in previous fair housing. So kind of diving into that last segment that you mentioned, the covered criminal history. Why is the criminal background check a problem? And kind of just if you can explain a little bit more on that specific segment.
Sure. So Cook County has decided and agrees, along with many other jurisdictions in this country, that having a criminal record alone does not lead to an unsuccessful tenancy. Having a criminal record is as common as having a college degree. And therefore, you have to consider the inequalities within the criminal justice system when thinking about whether or not we are going to allow criminal history or people that have had some interaction with the justice system to preclude them right off the bat from accessing all housing. There's absolutely no research that establishes a connection between a criminal background and a successful tenancy. It's a poor predictor of future behavior and does not determine who will or who will not be good tenants. On the other hand, housing instability is significantly associated with recidivism or putting people in a position where they need to go back to criminal behavior because they haven't been able to get access to stable housing. It hurts their abilities to not having stable housing hurts your ability to continue to make a living. So it impacts so much about your life. Criminal records are very common. 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record. It's as common, as I said, as having a college degree. And not only is it very common, but there are also serious issues with the accuracy of these records. Blanket exclusions on the third of potential housing applicants is just bad business practice. It needlessly inhibits otherwise good applications from even submitting rental applications. And these limitations will increase vacancy time and prevent otherwise well-suited tenants from having a lease. And significant racial disparities are in play at every stage of the criminal justice system, from arrest to conviction to incarceration. And they are not really reflective of higher rates of criminal behavior. So nearly half of Black males have been arrested by age 23, despite similar propensities for criminal behavior among all racial groups. For example, African Americans are 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession, despite the equal rates of marijuana use among individuals of all races. So to preclude African American people from housing because they also happen to have an associated criminal record is disparately impacting people on the basis of race. That's not okay. More individuals also with disabilities are more likely to be arrested, convicted, and face jail time. Adhering to blanket screening policies that exclude applicants with criminal records does inevitably have the unintended result of excluding people of color and people with disabilities. So whether intentional or not, it has legal ramifications that need to be discussed. So the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission have all found that because of the disparate impact of the justice system on people of color, employment, housing decisions made solely on the basis of criminal records run the risk of committing blanket discrimination. So what it's really important for us to remember is that this helps people access housing and helps people lift themselves up out of poverty and out of unequitable situations.
Right. And so what does the Just Housing Amendment do?
So the Just Housing Amendment is basically an amendment that prohibits arrest record discrimination. It prevents ban the box, which it bans the box, which delays the consideration of criminal history until other criteria are met by the applicant. They show that they are otherwise qualified for this housing. And so it delays that consideration until they've at least met those other qualification requirements. And if providers deny the housing based on the basis of the criminal record background, the denial must be necessary to protect against the demonstrable risk of safety of persons and property. So there has to be a very good reason to say, no, we're not going to consider renting to that person. It also describes an individualized assessment process that affords landlords information to make a reasonable, sound decision based on someone's conviction history in conjunction with other important factors that they have to look at. It also means that landlords cannot consider arrests, charges, and a citation, which are not indicative that anyone has ever actually been convicted of anything. Participation in diversion or deferral of judgment programs. So if someone has had their case in a deferment program or a diversion program, then that would not be something that can be considered. They cannot consider sealed or expunged records. Juveniles, you will not be prejudiced because of the fact that as a youth, some mistaken judgment happened. And convictions that are over 3 years old. There are some exceptions to that 3-year rule.
And so you mentioned some exceptions. So can we elaborate? Are there any exceptions to this ordinance or to this amendment?
Sure, there are some significant exceptions to this rule. One of them is that where a federal or state law mandates a denial of housing access for that particular applicant. In some situations, public housing authorities have very specific restrictions on criminal activity and criminal background. So the current use of illegal drugs is something that can be, one can be denied for housing of public housing authorities. Individuals who were evicted from subsidized housing in 3 years prior for drug-related activity can be excluded. Those that are manufacturing methamphetamine in federally subsidized housing, people who've been convicted of that can be excluded. And there is a lifetime requirement to register for past sex offenses in federally subsidized housing. In addition, in some instances where a person is currently required to register for past sex offenses, they can be excluded. Or where a person is currently subject to residency restrictions for past sex offenses, they can be excluded from housing.
And thanks for mentioning those exceptions. I do want to, before we go any forward, I do want to mention, if you're tuning in or you're joining us on this broadcast, if you have any questions about this just housing amendment, or any comments or questions about it, go ahead and put them into the chat box. I'm more than happy to read them off and ask our attorney Lean here to answer or to address those questions or concerns. And I also want to turn your attention to the Google form that's on there. It's a pinned comment, so when you should be able to see the link, if you can go ahead and just put in your zip code or your ward, that'll help us tailor these segments a little bit better to address whatever concerns or trends are happening in your area. I'm not missing anything. And just one last question that I have here, Aileen. How does this whole like the amendment work, the ordinance, how does it all work?
So tonight I would like to give kind of an overview of the Just Housing Amendment. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the process is that you can expect if you are a returning citizen or have a history of criminal interaction with the system. So you can kind of know what's to be expected. If you happen to encounter something that doesn't sound right or doesn't seem to fit this, I think this is so new that there may be violations happening all the time. And if you think that you may have been discriminated against and denied housing since the beginning of the year for some kind of interaction with the criminal system, we would like you to call us at 312-347-7600 and try to apply to us for services to see if this is something that we should take a deeper look at and see if there's been a problem here and that you in fact have been discriminated against. So please do call that number if you feel like this may have affected you. As I say, I'm going to go over an overview of this tonight, and then I would invite you all to come back to our Tenant Thursday on October 29th, where Alex has invited me to come back and talk a little bit in more detail about this law and how it can hopefully help people to fairly be considered for applications for housing and be considered for housing despite interactions in some way with the system. So I look forward to coming back on the 29th to do that. But right now, I'd like to give you sort of just an overview of how this looks. We will also be attaching a flyer to our website, lcbh.org. And that flyer will also talk about this in a little further detail. But what this means is that housing providers must follow certain steps now if they intend to conduct a criminal background check on its applications. First of all, this criminal background check must be applied for everyone. It cannot just be selectively used for certain people. So it must be applied to everyone. They can go through a pre-qualification stage, and this pre-qualification allows the tenant to display their other good qualifications. They can go through an income verification, a credit background check, and all the other kinds of background checks that are ordinarily part of an application for housing. The next step is the background check. They are allowed to do a background check that screens for only the 3-year criminal history of the applicant. They cannot go back more than 3 years. Any convictions older than 3 years may not be used to deny a housing application. If a conviction is found, then the landlord is required to conduct an individualized assessment. I can talk to you about that in greater detail, because that is the second step, that once there's a criminal background and you would want to know what a background would reflect. So you're going to want to do your own personal background to make sure what your record looks like. And then you can prepare for this individualized assessment. And we'll talk about that in greater detail on the 29th of October. And then finally, the third step is that the landlord needs to give you an approval or a denial. It must be in writing, and you have the right to dispute a denial. And you have the right to know about that dispute process. So that kind of summarizes the Just Housing Amendment and the background to its passage. I'm excited to help people learn more about this, to help housing providers navigate this so that they can be sure that they do these, these housing assessments and these background checks in a fair way that gives them the information that they need, but doesn't unfairly prejudice people who are otherwise really going to be great tenants.
Right, and thank you for that brief overview. And as she mentioned, we will be following up a part 2, as you can kind of say, to this segment on the 29th of October. And if we can, Aileen, one more time, can you provide that phone number where they can reach if they have any questions?
Sure. So if you have any questions, if you think there's a chance that someone has denied you housing based on one of these criteria that is disallowable, so you've been subjected to a criminal background check at the start of your housing application, or you've been deterred from even applying because they are telling you we don't consider anyone with a criminal background, you should give us a call. And our number is 312-347-7600.
Awesome. And I'm writing it in the chat box as well, in case you missed it, or any things like that, or you're joining us after this broadcast is live. That way it's easy for you to just copy and paste it and put it on your phone if you're tuning in on the phone through your phone, or copy it through if you're on the desktop. And I do want to open it up. So if you're viewing, if you have any questions about this ordinance or the Just Housing Amendment, please go ahead and put them into the chat into the chat section of the live stream, and that way we can go ahead and answer your question or any concern that you may have. I do want to mention, if you have any immediate concerns, please go to renovention.com. I mentioned that at the beginning. I always like to mention it towards the end as well. And the link is already posted in the comment section as well. So you can always just click and go talk to Rennie. I do want to thank you, Aileen, for tuning well, not tuning in, but joining us today and covering such an important topic. And it's a brand new ordinance too, that came out this year. So coming on and clarifying and kind of providing some background is really important. I do want to thank you for that.
Well, great, and I think that it's good to know about the ordinance. It's kind of been a new movement in our country to help people that are returning citizens to return to a full life where they can vote and live freely and get employment and be able to move forward in their life. The other thing you should know is that a landlord that intends to conduct a criminal background check needs to tell you ahead of time too. So at the time that they take your application fee, you need to be apprised of the fact that this is a process that you will be going through before your housing application will be approved. So no surprises. Anyway, thank you again, Alex, for having me, and I look forward to any questions that y'all might have.
Definitely. No, thank you. And thanks for all that really important information. I'm not seeing any questions. So before we end today's broadcast, I do want to plug in next week's. Next week we have a follow-up to the Just Cause, and this one's going to be in Spanish. I believe the first one that was about 2 weeks ago was only in English. This was going to be only in Spanish and only Spanish transmission or broadcast. So we have that coming. And then on the 29th, we have the follow-up to today's broadcast as well. So remember, we're on every Thursday at 6 p.m. So if you miss us or if you tune in after the broadcast, please go ahead and comment or put any questions you may have. I do look at these every day after the broadcast and are more than happy to answer any questions offline. With that said, thank you. And then we'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m.
Thank you.